Hello and welcome to another Times Radio members question and answer. Today we're answering comments and questions from our channel members on Frontline and other videos about current conflicts and their impacts on the world stage. Not that there's anything happening at the moment. I'm Philip Ingram, former senior British military intelligence officer and now global commentator on all things geopolitics, defence, security, terrorism and more. So straight into the questions. Our first question this week, or first point this week, comes from Smart Gran. Great handle, Smart Gran. She says that Putin should be arrested as soon as he enters the United States. He's a war criminal. Isn't the logical thing for the confiscation of Russian money to be given to Ukraine to pay for its defence and to go some way towards reparations by the aggressor, Russia? There's a couple of things in that. Putin, I don't think, has got plans to go to the United States at the moment. He won't even go to the United Nations in New York because it means having to enter the United States. But the international arrest warrant that there is out against Putin comes from, I believe, the International Criminal Court. The United States are not signatories to that court, and therefore they don't have to do that. It is up to them whether they do it from a national perspective. And I think, given the comments we're getting out from Trump, he would not want to stir the Russians by arresting Vladimir Putin. And yes, it seems on the surface that there's a logical thing in taking the confiscated Russian money, or it's not really confiscated, it's frozen Russian money in different banks. And in Europe, we've got, in Belgium alone, I think there's over $200 billion. The difficulty is if we seize it and then we distribute it elsewhere, we would have to get something that would underpin a change in international law. So a United Nations Security Council resolution. That's never going to happen because Russia's got a veto on it. Something out of the EU that would suggest that we could do that. Again, that's unlikely because as soon as you get international bodies underpinning that and setting it as a precedence, then the same thing could happen in other countries. So what that would end up doing is polarizing the way investments happen across the world. So we'd get less investment into New York, into London, into Western banks. Countries that are would be concerned about those investments would then go and invest it into Russian banks, Chinese banks, and others around the world. We get a greater polarization of the economy. On the surface of it, it seems completely the logical thing to do, but the complexities behind that and the implications behind that at second order and third order are significant. So it's not as easy as I would love it to be that easy, and it would give a simple solution. Of note, Canada has already done that and taken $5 billion of Russian money and passed that to Ukraine. What the EU is doing is it's taking the interest that's made of it and it's using that to help fund Ukraine. And I think they can continue doing that without it impacting international law and potential wider investment, causing wider investment issues. Nick comes in next and asks to what extent Russia can be relied on to abide by the terms of any agreement. What securities and safeguards can the West put in place to enforce any agreement? The reality is, unless it's underpinned by the United States, and even previous agreements underpinned by the United States, the United Kingdom and Russia, in giving security guarantees to Ukraine, Russia cannot be relied on. Russia has regularly failed to comply with any agreement it's ever signed up to. So that is one of the things that will be on Zelensky's mind and on the international community's mind. Put Trump to one side whenever there is any peace agreement, or if there is any peace agreement inside Ukraine. I say if because I think we're a long way from it at the moment. No matter what Donald Trump's saying, there's an awful lot of water to go under the bridge before the conditions are set for an agreement. Securities and safeguards can the West put in place to enforce any agreement? Well, we've already heard Francois Macron and Keir Starmer turn around and talk about French and British troops on the ground, not in the areas that were the front line, but on the ground in Ukraine, providing that. That will give a degree of security and safeguard, but that will turn into a very, very long-term operation and something that we'll get sucked into for, I would say, decades rather than years. Donald Trump has turned around and said this is Europe's problem and Europe has to focus on it. Keir Starmer is going and asking for a US backstop. I don't think Trump's going to provide that US backstop. And this is where we're going to have to see a massive increase in expenditure across Europe in defence budgets. Now that can be used to underpin growth in different countries across Europe. And this is where the politicians in different countries are going to have to look at that from their perspective. But we've already heard the increase in defence expenditure in the UK to 2.5% of GDP, with a plan, or looking at a plan, to get up to 3% of GDP. That's setting the right tone and the right conditions. I think we may have to go even further. But again, that can be linked to economic growth. Joshua, you come in and say, surely Trump needs the minerals because he's been cut off by China. We need to finish this war with a definitive defeat of Russia before one which is brewing in the South China Sea. And we're making a series of very bad decisions that will come back to haunt us. Xi is preparing his population for war. This is coming whether we want it or not. Joshua, a series of points there that are 100% accurate. China owns about 90% of the rare earth mineral, the economically viable rare earth mineral mines around the world. There are up to about 20 different minerals that are mined, but some of them come from, in economic terms, only one mine in the world. And China owns, as I say, 90% of them. The rare earth minerals, rare earth metals are used in every bit of technology we've got today. The United States has been concerned about Chinese ownership of these sources of rare earth minerals for quite some time. And US Department of Defense has started to open up non-economic mines in the United States to allow them access to rare earth minerals, to build up stockpiles of them so that the US Department of Defense can continue to manufacture weapons capabilities should there be a need in war. This is where access to Ukraine's rare earth minerals are very important. But I'd also say there's another piece to this, and it's economic as well. If you look at one of the more common rare earth minerals, lithium. Lithium is used in the batteries for all of our devices, the batteries for our electric cars and everything else. China has got the biggest output of lithium in the world, but it doesn't mine it in China. It mines it in Australia and elsewhere. It processes it in China. There are very few lithium processing plants around the world. The United States has only got one. It's owned by Tesla. Elon Musk, the owner of Tesla, is Donald Trump's right-hand advisor. Now, it's sensible that America secures sources of these minerals that don't rely on them coming from China, especially if China is seen as the big adversary. And I agree with you, we need to finish this war with a definitive defeat of Russia before what's brewing in the South China Seas. I do think that if any territory is given to Vladimir Putin, and Xi Jinping says, oh, that's got a good permanent solution, they have taken that territory by force, they're now being allowed to keep it. Xi Jinping will make the calculation as to whether he thinks he can ride out the wrath of international sanctions if he took Taiwan back by force. He's already said that is one of his intentions to do so. If he thinks Donald Trump would let him get away with it, he will go for it. That will cause a Southeast Asian pivot. The economic shock that would go across the world because of the importance of trade coming from Southeast Asia and the impact that would have just on trade routes, never mind the semiconductors out of Taiwan and elsewhere. The economic shock would make the economic shock that we suffered because of the energy implications of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine 3 years ago. That'll seem like small change compared to what will happen. The economic impact across the globe would be huge. And as you say, Xi Jinping is preparing for it. He's already stockpiling natural resources that are over and above what China needs on its daily or annual usage. He's already growing his power projection military capability. He's already growing his military in a much more professional, with a much more professional stance. It is worrying times. And if we get Ukraine wrong, I could see a Southeast Asian pivot very, very quickly indeed. Worst case scenario, I'm a former military intelligence officer, but planner as well. You always look at worst case, best case, most likely case. Worst case scenario, if there is a Southeast Asian pivot and Ukraine hasn't finished properly, we've got the Middle East brewing up, Middle East blows up, and we suddenly get Southeast Asia, Middle East, and then We might see Putin go for another push again in Ukraine or elsewhere. We see a European conflict, and they all join together, and it turns into a global conflict. But that's worst case scenario. Let's hope none of that happens. So that's the end of our points and questions this week. Thanks for watching this week's question answers and for posting your questions. Remember, if you want access to exclusive videos and have your questions answered, please sign up for Times Radio membership. It's good. The videos are great for keeping you up to date. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.